and welcome back to Vinyl Friday. More specifically, welcome back to another episode of Vinyl Friday, the Revolver Odyssey. Famously, the Beatles opened their recording sessions for Revolver with Tomorrow Never Knows. Turn off your mind, relax and float downstream. Which blows my mind, especially as they had only just finished recording Rubber Soul a few months earlier. It's just a massive change. We're not listening to that song today though. We're listening to the next song that they worked on after that. In his 1980 Playboy interview, John Lennon called today's song one of Paul's best, and I am inclined to agree. I think that the song that we are listening to today is the best song on Revolver, Fight Me, and it sounds like this. Oh, good song. To be fair, depending on my mood or the day of the week or what have you, I could probably make the argument that any song on this album is the best song on this album. It's just that I'd feel like making the argument for this one most often. Today, it's my favorite, so it's a good day to do a deep dive, a thorough breakdown of this incredible piece of music. Obviously, there are a lot of horns on this track, so we will be bringing back the brass correspondent. Her debut was not so illustrious. But I and all of the other correspondents have been working together with her this week, and we've put together something a little bit different. We are so excited to share it with you, and we'll be looking at it a little bit later in the episode, so hold on to your seats for that. So let's begin. From when they were teenagers, the Beatles loved American R&B. They were big fans of like Little Richard and Chuck Berry, the Shirelles. Baby, it's you. So when the time came to begin recording their next project, the Beatles had really hoped to do so at Stax Records in Memphis, Tennessee. It's the recording house that was the home of Otis Redding and Sam and Dave, Booker T and the MGs, Wilson Pickett, among others, et al. Paul said, and I quote, that music had a raw quality that for some reason you can't get in this country being England. Alas, it did not work out. They did end up recording this in Abbey Road Studios, but we will put a pin in this for later, so don't forget. It pains me to say this, but the first iteration of this song is not good. There is a reason that they continued to workshop this song. It sounds like this. What can I do? What can I be? When I'm with you, I want to stay there. Maybe it's because I know the released version like the back of my hand, but this version sounds so wrong with acoustic guitar and harmonium. They haven't laid down a bass track yet, so it's incredibly empty. It's got these backing vocals that I think sound a little bit too much like Dr. Robert. Every single day of my life. You can hear the uncertainty in the direction of the song when he sings, "Got to get you into my life, somehow, some way." Even the discussion at the beginning of the song, where they're all making suggestions about the best way to start the song, it hasn't found its feet yet.
So how do we get into it?
Well, George carries on counting, but you just start on 3.
Just switch it in so you don't get any of the organ starting up.
Why though?
1, 2, 3, 4.
They sing this like, I need your love part for the bridge of the song.
I need your love, I need your love, I need your love.
I don't feel like that works. I do enjoy Paul's vocal ad-libs at the end of the song. But I don't think it is their best work. Unfortunately, they came back the next day and decided to do a little bit more with it. That session is a big improvement, partly because George had started to experiment with this earwormy little guitar riff. And another reason is that with the addition of the bass part, you get a very tasty little chord in the verse. Piano correspondent, can you tell us more, please? Hello again, friends. It's nice to see you. So we've discussed this in a different episode recently, but essentially the bass is an instrument that is almost in charge of the direction of the song. So once again, if your song is in G, and then you go down to an F, and then you come back up to G, it sounds like this. But then you add the bass, and the bass, instead of dropping down to the F, stays on the G, which gives us, in context, I think that is part of what gives it that unbridled joy. That chord there. Oh, that is one of my favorite chords. So you've got Paul and George laying down this dual guitar part, which sounds very cool. And there's this layer of fuzz that they're playing around with. It's very reminiscent of Think For Yourself off Rubber Soul. Which, and I cannot overstate this, was only recorded a few months ago. Just the transformation, the maturation, the development, it's incredible. But maybe I'll get into that a bit more in a later video. Now is not the time, Nancy. I think this version is decent, but it is not peak Got to Get You Into My Life. So I think they decided that they had done everything that they could with it at this point, and they left it for about a month. Paul must have spent quite a lot of that month listening to soul records. And it's a good thing too, because that Stax Motown influence took a fairly bad song and made it better. Get it? Because he came back with a head full of horn parts, basically. And decided to apply that to this song. So they bring in 5 session musicians, 2 of whom were recruited by Paul McCartney himself from a club where he used to go and listen to music after work. They were 3 trumpets and 2 saxophones, 5 musicians. One of the trumpeters, whose name was Les Condon, was asked about this session later, and of it he said, well, they didn't have a thing written down. We'll go to our Storytime correspondent who can elaborate on that for us.
Hello, Vinyl Friday family fancy meeting you here. Tenor saxophonist Peter Coe says, Paul and George Martin were in charge. There was nothing written down, but Paul sat at the piano and showed us what he wanted. I remember we tried it a few times to get the feel right, and then John Lennon, who was in the control room, stuck his thumb aloft and shouted, "Got it! Love the enthusiasm!"
Geoff Emerick was also a big part of why the finished product of this song was so damn good.
I close-mic'd the instruments, actually put the mics right down into the bells, instead of the standard technique of placing them 4 feet away, and then applied severe limiting to the sound.
So a limiter is a piece of studio equipment which catches the loudest parts of a song and basically creates like a hard ceiling so that the volume can't exceed that level, which means that the recording can't distort or clip. So that's the reason behind the sort of harsh, brash, aggressive tone of the trumpet and saxophone parts. They had microphones buried in their bells. A problem I have with the earlier versions of the song is that the first is way too sparse, way too empty, and the second takes that really lovely guitar riff but then overuses it. It's too busy, there's too much of it. With this horn recording session, they recorded a range of different parts, and then Paul and George Martin got together afterwards and picked and chose the ones that they wanted to keep for the final recording. And I think they did a bloody brilliant job, because the brass now fills those spaces, but it doesn't overwhelm or crowd the song. There isn't too much of it. It's very tasteful. It's beautifully done. It's almost like they're good at this. I'd like to examine this more closely now, so without further ado, we will cross to the brass correspondent and a bunch of the other correspondents, where they will dazzle us with a perhaps slightly unconventional rendition of this horn part. And hopefully, the brass correspondent will redeem herself after her dismal performance of the Grassroots Midnight Confessions. Take it away, friends!
Hello. If you'll allow me to make a quick interruption. I am Fathom, the proprietor of this channel, a songwriter, and a maker of experimental musical instruments. I call this one an ullophone. Quite simply, an ullophone
is made of a butchered school recorder, a small piece of PVC pipe, and a balloon stretched across the top. It sounds like this. The correspondents will give you a demonstration. Right about now. Basically, from here until the rest of the episode, I'm going to be looking at why this song works. I think having listened to that lovely rendition, at least I hope you think it was lovely, we enjoyed making it, I think the brass is the most logical place to start. Here we go! First thing I like about the brass is that this track opens on a triumphant, explosive fanfare. And the cuts, they're so clean. Lovely. Excellent direction from George Martin and Paul, I'm sure. This is one of the things that's so magical about horns. They can do a thing that the guitars couldn't. That is dynamics. You can play dynamically on guitar, but you can't increase the volume of a note once you've played it. In fact, it does the opposite. The sound decays from the moment that you've, struck your chord. Horns, though, you can build them up. And I think that was one of the missing elements with the guitar version of this song. I'll find a good crescendo. Oh, when I say play dynamically, I mean that you can swell the volume or you can drop the volume. You'll see what I mean. See, it starts quietly, it builds up. Boom! I love that part in particular because it builds this tension. You feel like it's going to explode forth. And the first time it doesn't. The first time it's a psych! We're back at the verse. Chorus? No, verse. But the second time... chorus! Boom! They've teased it the first time, and they fulfilled the second time. Very satisfying. So it's not just about the notes that are being played, it's about how they're being played. Beautifully directed. I like that the saxes match what the bass is doing in this descending part right here. So the bass and the saxes are doing that descending line in tandem. It's a very cool way to add interest to what the bass is doing. I also like that the horns are being played with this very staccato clipped da, 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 as opposed to da, 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 da. And I think that really matches the tone of the lyrics. There are so many of them. They're very rhythmic. But da 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 da. It has the same flavor as da 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 da. It's like this juxtaposition of a whole bunch of frenzied short staccato notes combined with these very long, drawn out ones. It works really well. It's subtle, but it's what the vocals are doing as well. So it's a really well written part. And they aren't happening at the same time, they're sort of feeding off each other, calling and responding. So, for instance, if you listen to the ends of the lines of the verses, the vocal is static. And it's bolstered by these trumpets underneath that are also static, and then one of them pulls away and plays this little responding part to what the vocals have just done. Here. Static. Da 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 da. Da, 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 da. And this is the thing, right? The brass is this like self-contained piece of music within a piece of music with these rhythmic and melodic motifs. For instance, they are teased in the verse, consummated at the chorus, and of course it bookends the song in the introduction and then again at the end. And it takes us out. The dropout at the end of the chorus makes that unaccompanied brass part all that more impactful. Isn't that great? It's so enjoyable. I also love this. It's that bend. Oh, it's just played so well by George and Paul. This guitar part, from which the brass parts are descended, gets this little nod right at the end of the song before it hands back over to the brass to take us through to the end. The second version of the song has an overwhelming amount of guitar, but just this little touch with that trademark Revolver snarl is perfect. It's like a novel reinterpretation of a theme that we are now really familiar with by this point in the song. It keeps the song interesting. It stops the brass from becoming too boring and repetitive, which I think was the problem the guitar had in the first place. What do you think? Do you agree? Is the purring anything to go by? And it takes the soul song and makes it just a little bit rockier, just a little bit harder. It's just got an edge to it that is specific to Revolver. And that brings us to the end of the song. The outro of the song is driven by this ever-rising brass part, which means that it fades out in an absolute frenzy, like this. Listen to these high trumpet parts. And then it goes up higher, here. Absolute frenzy. There's just like a whole party happening at the back half of this song. What a great way to end. And I know that we haven't yet reached the last song on this album, but I feel like that great frenzied fade out sort of crossfades beautifully into the next track. Not to spoil anything, we will come to that in about 2 weeks. I think that's about all I have to say about the brass today anyway. Let's have a quick chat about the rhythm section. I think that the bass part in this track is surprisingly funky, and it's propelled by these really thunderous licks. Better demonstrated than described. Bass correspondent? Hey team, how's it hanging? There's also that little skip that it does in the descending part, which gives the song its bounce. Did you catch it? It's that bit that goes doo-doo-doo. It's pretty cool. I like that bit a lot. Back to you. And Ringo, of course, is playing these clean, unadorned drum parts to make space for those resplendent horns. It's really the only point where he gets to shine. It's time for us to talk about the voice. I'm so glad that they got rid of the backing vocals for this song, because it is the perfect showcase of the tonal range of Paul's voice. On this track, he has his Stax roar at the chorus.
Got to get you into my life.
But I would argue that he also has the sweetness of Motown in the verses. It's clear and it's precise.
And had you gone, you knew in time we'd meet again, for I had told you.
Brace yourselves, I'm going to make a superlative statement. I think that this is one of Paul McCartney's best vocal performances ever. I mean, in those verses, his voice is lovely, it's accurate, it's very sweet.
Ooh,
especially those there. Ooh, so passionate. There's so much emotion behind that, you know? And man, his vocals at the end.
At one point, while Paul was recording the lead vocal, John actually burst out of the control room to shout his encouragement, evidence of the camaraderie and teamwork that was so pervasive during the Revolver sessions. I just loved that. John was so moved by that incredible vocal performance of Paul's that he very impulsively ran into the room to...
And I can see why. Let's listen.
I've got to get you into my life.
I love that.
I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there.
Oh, so soulful.
And suddenly I see you.
Man, those high notes, the power behind those high notes. Such a great performance. So good. This is a song meant to be played loud. I hope you know that. I hope that's how you're listening to it, but not for sustained periods. Protect your ears, folks. The melody And the lyrics and the arrangement of the song are great. For a start, this is the perfect key for this song. Not all keys work for every song. Different keys have like corresponding emotional states, which means that if you put the song in a different key, it wouldn't sound right. It wouldn't convey the same kind of energy. For example, I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. Doesn't have the energy. Or was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. One, it's too high, and two, it just sounds a little bit too pure. It doesn't have that raw sound that Paul was looking for in the song. I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. It just doesn't have the same impact as I was alone, I took a ride, I didn't know what I would find there. You know, these subtle things make a difference. It's why we love the songs we love. Back to you. This key sounds bright and hopeful. Also, the melody is very typical of Paul McCartney in that it bounds upwards. A lot of his melodies tend to do that. Here making each in Penny Lane, you say yes. Take a sad song, close your eyes and I'll kiss you. They trend upwards. And this song does that as well. And it gives the song that high energy. It's buoyant, it's celebratory, it's jubilant. I also think it's lyrically solid. And it serves, as I mentioned earlier, this very specific rhythmic function. It ba-da-da-da, 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 da-da-da-da. If you take a song like Here, There, and Everywhere, it's entirely about the melody. Ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba-ba. This one has the melodic aspect, but also the way that he's singing it, it's also a rhythmic instrument. I like that about this song as well. In that same Playboy interview, the full quote is, I think that was one of his best songs because the lyrics are good and I didn't write them. When I say that he could write lyrics if he took the effort, here's an example. I completely agree. I think sometimes Paul McCartney tends to phone in his lyrics. I've talked about it before. But when he really puts his mind to it, he can absolutely crush it. There are several songs on this album that I think exemplify his abilities as a lyricist. This is one of them. John goes on to say that this song is about Paul's experiences with LSD, but Paul later corrected the record. He said, and I quote, I've been a rather straight working class lad, but when we started to get into pot, it seemed to me to be quite uplifting. To me it was mind expanding, literally mind expanding. He continues. It was something that entered our lives, and I thought it would be a good idea to write a song with Got to Get You Into My Life. And only I would know that I was talking about pot. That is, at least until he gave that interview. Now we all know. The last thing that I think makes this song work is that it is clearly a group effort. You've got George Harrison writing that guitar motif that will later become the centerpiece of the song, arguably. You've got George Martin doing what he does best, which is acting as a conduit for the Beatles' creative vision in order that it can be translated into something instrumental, but something which still captures that original Beatles intent. He really understood what they wanted and what they were trying to communicate, and he arranged instrumentally in a way that perfectly encapsulates that. He makes excellent arrangement choices accordingly. Jeff Emmerich applying his young mind to innovating new miking techniques, new and completely forbidden at Abbey Road. You are absolutely not allowed to do that to microphones. Could have been an expensive mistake, but he persisted and revolutionized the way that we record instruments and rock music. He also helped to pioneer the sound that allowed them to thicken that horn section. Paul was saying that it sounded too empty. There wasn't enough body to it. And so the Storytime correspondent will tell us.
There were only 5 players on the session, and when it came to mix the song, Paul kept saying, I wish we could make the brass sound bigger. George Martin replied, well, there's no way we're bringing them back in for another session. We've got to get the album wrapped up, and there's no more budget for outside players anyway. That's when I came up with the idea of dubbing the horn track onto a fresh piece of 2-track tape, then playing it back alongside the multi-track, but just slightly out of sync, which had the effect of doubling the horns. We're going to follow that up with a reading from this book, which comes with the Super Deluxe LP edition and was lent to me by my buddy Mike. Thanks, Mike. I appreciate it. Manually syncing up the two tape machines was a tricky trial and error process. Tape machines ran at marginally different speeds, and so would drift out of synchronization, creating a phasing sound. By 1967, that sort of effect was used deliberately to color many of the Beatles' recordings. So again, further innovation from Mr. Jeff Emmerich.
You've got John's attention and enthusiasm for the project, all of the times that he came bounding out of the control room with his unbridled passion for the way Paul was singing or the way that the horn parts were sounding. Even if he doesn't play a major role instrumentally in the song, he was 100% on board. He loved this song. Apparently until the day he died. Aww. So it goes. And Ringo... he's just Ringo. He can always be counted on to bring the good vibes. I think that is partly what you can hear at the beginning of that earliest version. Everybody is there, everybody is engaged, everybody's involved, everybody's piping in with their suggestions about the best way to make this song sound great. And so to conclude, Paul McCartney said of the period where they were recording this song and he was listening to the soul music, I quote, "That's often how things happen with me. I'll hear something on the radio and think, oh wow, I'm gonna do my version of that." And that is precisely what is so special about the Beatles. They were frequently trying on another kind of mind, be it novel experiences or the music of others. But they were so organically skilled that in doing so, they invariably and unwittingly often came up with something that was both incredible and entirely unique. Entirely of themselves, entirely Beatles. In Paul's words, I quote, "When we finished Revolver, we realized that we'd found a new British sound, almost by accident." What more can you say? And that's it from me. If you enjoyed this episode, or you would like to support any of the weird things that I do, be it talking about these records or building more experimental DIY instruments, I'll leave a link in the description to my Buy Me a Coffee page where you are most welcome to make a donation, but no pressure, my friends. Thank you very, very much to everybody who has made a donation or signed up as a member. You have my deepest gratitude. If you're curious about what any of my original music sounds like, I'll leave a link in the description for that as well. Otherwise, thanks for hanging out with me. I'll see you here next week. Have a great weekend! John Lennon, in his 1980 Playboy interview. In 1980, John Lennon in his Ooh, your feet are dirty. You're making a mess. One of the trumpeters, whose name was Les Condon, not Condom. Childish. I forgot to show you the thing. I was so busy dancing. His vocal there is clean and it's clear and under control. You didn't expect an acne ad to show up in this episode, did you? I didn't. Now prepare yourselves. I'm gonna make a superlative. Oh, you dick. You're such a little monster.